Welcome back, the channel where we talk about crypto finance and the future of money from a calm, logical, and professional point of view. If you're someone who doesn't just want hype, but actually wants to understand what's happening behind the scenes in global finance, then you're exactly where you need to be. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you to everyone who supports this channel by liking the videos, subscribing, and watching till the end. Those simple actions help this channel grow more than most people realize, and I truly appreciate it. Now let's get straight into today's topic because it's an important one and it's creating a lot of confusion in the market. Recently, SWIFT came out and said they are working on their own proprietary blockchain. As soon as this news hit, many people immediately started asking the same question. If SWIFT has its own blockchain, does that mean the XRP ledger is no longer needed? Is this bad news for Ripple? And does this mean XRP is losing its relevance? At first glance, those concerns sound reasonable. In the early days, Ripple openly talked about improving or even replacing parts of the SWIFT system using blockchain technology. So now when people hear that SWIFT itself is building a blockchain, it feels like direct competition. Some people even believe this could completely remove XRP from the picture. But as always in finance, the surface level story is usually not the full story. In this video, we're going to slow things down and break this topic apart step by step. We're going to talk about what SWIFT actually is, what a private blockchain really means, how it's different from a public ledger like the XRP ledger, and whether this move by SWIFT is truly a threat or something very different. I want you to stick with me through this entire breakdown because by the end, your understanding of XRP, Ripple, and institutional blockchain adoption will be much clearer. First, let's address something directly so there's no confusion. In my opinion, SWIFT is not building on the XRP ledger. They are building their own private blockchain. This is not surprising, and it's exactly what you would expect from a legacy financial institution like SWIFT. They prefer control, predictability, and closed systems. So, the real question is not what they're building, but how much does it actually compete with Ripple and the XRP ledger? To answer that, you have to understand what Ripple is today. Ripple is no longer just a payments company. Many people are stuck in an old narrative where Ripple only equals cross-border payments. That may have been the starting point, but that's not where things end. Today, Ripple operates across custody, tokenization, stablecoins, liquidity solutions, and broader financial infrastructure. Payments were the entry point, not the final destination. A very useful way to think about this is through a simple business analogy. Amazon did not start as the world's biggest technology and logistics company. Amazon started by selling books online. At the time, people laughed at the idea. Traditional bookstores had physical locations, customer loyalty, and decades of experience. Many people said Amazon could never compete, but selling books was never the real innovation. The real innovation was e-commerce itself. Ripple follows a very similar path. Cross-border payments were the proof of concept. They showed the world that blockchain-based settlement could be faster, cheaper, and more efficient. But the long-term vision was always much larger. It was about building next-generation financial infrastructure, not just improving one process. Now compare that to what SWIFT is doing. SWIFT is not reinventing finance. They are modernizing their existing system. A private blockchain in simple terms is just a better internal database with some blockchain features. It is still closed, still permissioned, and still controlled by a central entity. That doesn't make it useless, but it does mean it's fundamentally different from a public distributed ledger. This distinction is critical. A private blockchain helps SWIFT serve its existing customers more efficiently. A public blockchain like XRPL is designed to be part of the open internet of value. These are two very different goals. One improves legacy systems, the other creates new financial rails. Another important point people overlook is timing. Ripple has been building blockchain infrastructure for over a decade. That means technology, talent, partnerships, and real-world testing. SWIFT is entering this space much later, and history shows us that when legacy players enter a disruptive market late, they usually validate the disruptor rather than defeat it. Think about, Tesla. Legacy car manufacturers had more money, more factories, and more experience. But Tesla was built around electric vehicles from day one. Electric technology was part of its DNA. The same applies here. Blockchain is not something Ripple added later. Blockchain is what Ripple is. For SWIFT, blockchain is an add-on. So when you step back and look at the bigger picture, this announcement by SWIFT is not a death sentence for XRP. In many ways, it's confirmation that Ripple was right early. The financial world is moving toward blockchain-based infrastructure. The only real question now is who is best positioned to lead that future. We need to clearly separate two ideas that are often mixed together: private blockchains and public blockchains. On the surface, they both use the word blockchain, but in practice, they solve very different problems and serve very different audiences. This distinction is where most confusion comes from. A Private blockchain is usually permissioned. That means only approved participants can access it, validate transactions, or even see what's happening inside the system. Control stays with a central authority or a small group of institutions. This setup makes sense for organizations like SWIFT because their entire business model is built around control, compliance, and coordination between trusted parties. For them, a private blockchain is simply a more efficient way to do what they already do. A public blockchain like the XRP ledger works in the opposite way. It is open, neutral, and accessible to anyone who wants to build on top of it. There is no single owner, no central switch that can be turned off, and no closed group deciding who gets access. This openness is not a weakness, it's the core feature. It allows the ledger to function as shared financial infrastructure, similar to how the internet functions as shared communication infrastructure. When people say SWIFT now has a blockchain, so why do we need XRP? They are assuming both systems are competing for the same role. In reality, they are not. SWIFT's blockchain will serve SWIFT's network. The XRP ledger serves a global open ecosystem that extends beyond any single company or consortium. One is an internal upgrade, the other is external infrastructure. Another key difference is interoperability. Public blockchains are designed to connect with many systems, assets, and networks. The XRP ledger is built to interact with exchanges, wallets, institutions, and applications across the world. Private blockchains usually struggle here. They are optimized for internal efficiency, not global composability. That limits their long-term flexibility. This is where Ripple's strategy becomes important. Ripple is not trying to replace every legacy system overnight. Instead, it is building tools that allow institutions to connect to public blockchain infrastructure in a controlled and compliant way. That includes liquidity solutions, custody services, tokenization platforms, and stable coins. Payments are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. SWIFT, on the other hand, is focused on protecting its existing business, and that's understandable. They sit at the center of global messaging for banks, but introducing a private blockchain creates an internal challenge for them. They have to migrate clients, retrain staff, maintain legacy systems, and avoid disrupting trillions of dollars in daily transactions. That's a massive operational risk. There's also a cultural difference that often gets ignored. Ripple is a technology-first company. Engineers, cryptographers, and blockchain specialists are at the core of its workforce. For SWIFT, blockchain is not part of its historical identity. It's a tool being adopted later in the game that matters because innovation is not just about technology. It's about mindset. History gives us many examples of this. Traditional retailers adopted e-commerce, but they struggled to compete with companies that were born online. Legacy media adopted streaming, but they couldn't move as fast as digital native platforms. In most cases, the disruptors didn't win because they were bigger. They won because their entire organization was built around the new model. The same dynamic applies here. Even if SWIFT builds a functional blockchain, it doesn't automatically give them an advantage over Ripple. In fact, it may slow them down. They are trying to modernize while preserving old structures. Ripple doesn't have that burden. It can move forward without worrying about breaking legacy revenue streams. Another important factor is network effects. Public blockchains gain value as more participants build, transact, and integrate. Developers, businesses, and institutions can all contribute to growth without asking for permission. Private blockchains do not benefit from this in the same way. Growth is controlled and limited by design. This means that even if SWIFT's blockchain is successful within its own ecosystem, it does not reduce the need for public ledgers. In many cases, it actually increases it. Private systems still need bridges to the broader financial world. They still need liquidity. They still need neutral settlement layers. This is where public blockchains remain essential. It's also important to understand that financial infrastructure is not winner take all. Multiple systems can coexist, each serving different roles. SWIFT upgrading its technology does not eliminate the demand for public blockchain settlement. If anything, it highlights the limitations of closed systems and the need for open ones. From this perspective, SWIFT entering the blockchain space is not an attack on Ripple. It's an acknowledgement that the old way is no longer sufficient. Ripple has been operating with that assumption for over a decade. SWIFT is just catching up. If institutions can move value on private blockchains, do they still need a neutral asset like XRP? This is where many people get confused because they assume internal efficiency automatically solves external coordination. In reality, those are two very different problems. A private blockchain can work extremely well inside a closed environment. Banks can message each other faster, reconcile data more efficiently, and reduce some operational friction. But global finance is not one closed system. It is a network of networks. Different banks, different countries, different currencies, different regulations, and different technologies all need to interact. Private blockchains do not eliminate this complexity. They simply manage it internally. This is exactly where a neutral bridge asset becomes important. XRP was not designed to replace banks or remove intermediaries. It was designed to connect fragmented systems. When value needs to move between two different ledgers, currencies, or jurisdictions, you need something that is liquid, fast, and neutral. A private blockchain does not solve that by itself. Think of it like internal company software. A corporation might have an extremely efficient internal system, but the moment it needs to interact with another company's system, it needs standards, connectors, and shared protocols. In finance, XRP functions as that connector. It doesn't care which internal system you use. It only cares about moving value between them efficiently. This is also why the existence of multiple private blockchains actually strengthens the case for public settlement layers. The more fragmented the ecosystem becomes, the greater the need for neutral infrastructure. Without it, every system becomes a silo. Silos don't scale well at the global level. Another misunderstanding is the idea that institutions will choose one system and ignore everything else. That's not how large organizations operate. Banks don't replace their entire infrastructure overnight. They layer new technology on top of existing systems. This is why interoperability matters far more than dominance. Ripple understands this. SWIFT understands this too. Even if they approach it differently, when SWIFT builds a private blockchain, it does not suddenly control global liquidity. It still has to deal with different currencies, time zones, and settlement risks. XRP was specifically designed to handle liquidity on demand. Instead of pre-funding accounts around the world, value can be sourced when it's needed. That efficiency does not disappear just because internal messaging improves. There is also a cost dimension that often gets overlooked. Maintaining liquidity in multiple currencies across multiple private systems is expensive. Capital gets trapped. Balance sheets become inefficient. XRP offers a way to reduce that friction by acting as a temporary bridge. That role becomes more important as financial systems become more complex, not less. Another key point is neutrality. Public ledgers are not owned by any single institution. That matters in global finance where trust is fragmented. A private blockchain controlled by one entity may work well for its members, but it does not automatically become acceptable to everyone else. A neutral open ledger reduces geopolitical and institutional friction. This is one of the reasons Ripple focused on building enterprise-grade tools around the XRP ledger. Custody, compliance, and integration are not optional in institutional finance. They are requirements. Ripple's approach has always been about meeting institutions where they are, not forcing them into an all-or-nothing transition. It's also important to understand that XRP's role is not limited to payments as tokenization expands. Assets like bonds, real estate, and commodities will need settlement layers. Private blockchains can issue assets internally, but settlement across systems still requires shared infrastructure. Public ledgers are uniquely suited for this role because they are accessible and programmable. This brings us back to the original concern. Does SWIFT building a blockchain make XRP irrelevant? When you look at the problem from a systems perspective, the answer is no. It changes the landscape, but it does not remove the need for neutral bridges. In fact, it highlights why those bridges exist in the first place. Financial infrastructure evolves in layers. Messaging, settlement, liquidity, custody, and governance all interact, but they are not the same thing. Improving one layer does not eliminate the others. SWIFT is improving its messaging and internal coordination. Ripple is building across multiple layers simultaneously. This layered approach is why Ripple's head start matters so much. It's not just about technology. It's about relationships, regulatory understanding, and real-world deployment. Those things take time. They cannot be copied overnight. As more private blockchains come online, the market will start to see a clearer distinction between internal efficiency tools and global settlement infrastructure. XRP sits firmly in the second category. It was designed for interoperability, not isolation. A familiar pattern starts to appear. Time and time again, legacy institutions adopt new technology, not to lead a transformation, but to protect their existing position. This doesn't mean they fail immediately. In many cases, they survive for years. But history shows that survival is very different from leadership. When legacy players adopt disruptive technology late, they often end up validating the disruptors rather than overtaking them. The reason is simple. By the time the legacy system moves, the disruptor has already evolved beyond the original use case. This is exactly what we're seeing with Ripple and SWIFT. SWIFT's move into blockchain is focused on preserving its core business. It's about improving efficiency, reducing costs, and keeping its network relevant. There's nothing wrong with that, but it also means SWIFT is building within strict constraints. They cannot break their existing model too quickly. They cannot afford major disruptions. Every step has to be careful, slow, and conservative. Ripple doesn't have those limitations. Blockchain is not something Ripple is adding on top of an old system. It is the system that gives Ripple flexibility. It allows faster iteration, broader experimentation, and deeper integration across different parts of finance. Over time, that difference compounds. This is where the DNA argument really matters. Companies built around a new technology tend to think differently. Their incentives, hiring, practices, and long-term strategies align with that technology. For Ripple, blockchain is not a feature, it's the foundation. For SWIFT, blockchain is a tool. This difference becomes even more important when you consider talent. The most skilled engineers and innovators tend to gravitate toward companies that are fully committed to the future, not those cautiously adapting to it. Over the past decade, blockchain native companies have built deep expertise that cannot be replicated quickly. Experience matters, especially in complex systems like financial infrastructure. There's also the issue of internal conflict. When a legacy company introduces a new system that could eventually replace its core business, it creates tension. Teams responsible for the old system may resist change. Revenue models may be threatened. Decision M slows down. This internal friction is one of the biggest challenges legacy institutions face during transformation. Ripple doesn't have to worry about cannibalizing an old business. Its entire mission is aligned with blockchain-based finance. That alignment allows it to push forward aggressively without hesitation over time. This leads to a widening gap between innovators and adapters. Another critical factor is ecosystem development. Public blockchains thrive when developers, startups, and institutions can build freely on top of them. This creates innovation that no single company could plan. Private blockchains do not benefit from this dynamic. Innovation is centralized and limited. That makes them less adaptable in the long run. This is why even successful private systems often rely on public infrastructure at some point. They may operate internally, but when they need global reach, liquidity, or interoperability, they turn outward. This creates natural points of integration rather than competition. So instead of seeing Swift's blockchain as a direct replacement for XRP, it's more accurate to see it as one piece of a much larger system, one that still needs neutral settlement, open liquidity, and global interoperability. Those needs don't disappear, they grow. This is also why regulatory clarity matters. As rules become clearer, institutions will prefer systems that are transparent, predictable, and already integrated into compliance frameworks. Ripple has spent years engaging with regulators, building compliant products, and operating within legal boundaries. That groundwork becomes a competitive advantage as the market matures. Legacy players often move once regulation forces their hand. Innovators move before that. By the time regulations solidify, the innovators are already positioned. That timing difference is crucial. When you put all of this together, Swift's move looks less like a threat and more like confirmation. It confirms that blockchain-based systems are inevitable. It confirms that the old infrastructure needs modernization. And it confirms that the direction Ripple chose years ago was the right one. What does Swift entering the blockchain space really mean for XRP, Ripple, and the future of financial infrastructure? The short answer is that it doesn't weaken Ripple. It actually reinforces why Ripple is ahead and why XRP remains relevant. Understanding this requires seeing beyond headlines and looking at structural advantages. First, timing is everything. Ripple started building blockchain solutions over a decade ago. Swift is only now experimenting with blockchain after years of skepticism. That means Ripple has experience, tested infrastructure, partnerships, and regulatory compliance that cannot be copied overnight. This head start is not just about technology. It's about trust, credibility, and real-world adoption. In institutional finance, these factors are more important than hype or speed to market. Second, Ripple's ecosystem is holistic. XRP is not just a token, it's part of a full suite of tools that serve banks, payment providers, and corporates. Custody solutions, stable coins, liquidity management, and cross-border payments all integrate into the same network. Swift's private blockchain may improve messaging efficiency, but it doesn't replicate the depth or interconnectedness of Ripple's offerings. That gives Ripple a strategic edge that a latecomer cannot easily overcome. Third, public versus private infrastructure is a fundamental difference. XRP Ledger is open, neutral, and programmable. Anyone can build on it, anyone can access it, and institutions can rely on it without asking permission. Private blockchains like the one Swift is rolling out remain permissioned, restricted, and less flexible. They serve internal efficiency rather than global interoperability. As finance becomes more interconnected, these open systems gain more relevance, not less. Fourth, talent and innovation matter. Blockchain native companies attract engineers, product managers, and innovators who want to shape the future, not patch the past. Ripple has been a magnet for top talent in crypto and fintech for years. Swift is trying to catch up in an area it previously ignored. That gap in innovation capacity is structural. It cannot be closed quickly. Fifth, network effects favor the early and open. Public ledgers like XRPL grow stronger as more participants use them. Developers, startups, and financial institutions contribute to the network. Private blockchains are limited by design. They don't benefit from global network effects. This means Ripple's influence grows organically, while Swift is mostly constrained to its members. Finally, Swift entering blockchain confirms Ripple's vision. Instead of being a threat, it validates the path Ripple chose years ago. Legacy institutions finally recognize that distributed, programmable, and interoperable systems are the future of finance. For investors and observers, this is an important point. Adoption by incumbents doesn't erase the advantages of early innovators. It highlights them. For anyone watching XRP and Ripple, the key takeaway is to separate fear from fact. Headlines may sound alarming, but structural realities tell a different story. Ripple's decadal, long head start, integrated ecosystem, public ledger, and alignment with real-world financial needs give it advantages that SWIFT cannot simply replicate. XRP is not just a speculative asset, it's a core component of an infrastructure that institutions are increasingly relying on. In conclusion, SWIFT's proprietary blockchain is not the end of XRP. It is a signal that the industry is moving toward the future. Ripple anticipated long ago. Public blockchains, neutral settlement layers, and interoperable networks remain essential. Ripple continues to lead the way, and XRP remains relevant as the bridge between fragmented systems. Legacy players can try to catch up, but disruptors who built with the future in mind will continue to set the pace.